Well, I appreciate you all having me here virtually. This is a first for me to do a presentation on Zoom, so I was excited when I actually saw my PowerPoint come up that hopefully we won't have any technical glitches. But I'm glad to be with you all today, kind of given everything that we're all going through as a community, and that I know that parents are absolutely facing at home right now. So I'll maybe just introduce myself a little bit. My name is Dr. Engel, Emily Engel. I'm a clinical psychologist in independent private practice. I've been in practice 15 years, the last 10 of which have been in Charlotte. Prior to that, I moved down from New York where I did my training. I've had experience. I work with, children on up through adults. On a regular day, I work with individuals with anxiety, depression, ADHD, addiction recovery, and also trauma recovery, the latter of which I think is very pertinent to this crisis that we're all navigating together. In terms of that, just to kind of elaborate a little bit, in my trauma training, I had the benefit of learning not just kind of the more what you think of as traditional therapy model of going into the office and exploring and processing and healing from traumas of the past, but also kind of more of a preventative and reactionary models. So this idea of mental health first responding when there is a disaster or crisis in the community. I've worked with 9/11 survivors, first responders, military, as well as crime victims and families, just kind of offering them immediate care, support, and guidance to individuals and community members to hopefully prevent kind of lasting negative consequences of trauma. And so I'm really I find myself in, during COVID, really pulling upon that experience as I meet with folks and kind of help them navigate these unprecedented times. I did, as I kind of transition into the talk itself, I did prepare a PowerPoint. I very well may have over-prepared. I'm going to try to keep my eye on the time because I know you want to get to the most helpful information, which is really the tips of what you can do in parenting, especially teens, through this time, to be as supportive as we can as parents, teachers, and caregivers, while also helping them to kind of navigate it with the least detriment, the least negative outcome, and even maybe some growth and positive outcomes as well. So I'm going to kind of just talk about some of kind of just an introduction, I guess, to the topic. And just I want to start by addressing the fact that being an adolescent is legitimately very stressful. Before you put COVID, you add COVID to the equation, the American Psychological Association did some nationwide studies in 2013 and then 18 recently, just looking at teen stress. And across the board, the majority of teens are reporting stress levels higher than what they would hope for, than what they think is healthy. Particularly, by far the highest area of concerns for teens are academics. We can do a whole other talk about kind of the pressures involved with the academic culture and where we're kind of hitting the mark and where we're unfortunately contributing to the problem at times. A very close second, 75% of adolescents are fearful of gun violence, school shootings, because it is unfortunately just part of their, what their generation is facing. And then kind of the host of other stressors that this generation is worrying about day to day. Suicide, they're aware of kind of the news and everything that's going on. And those risks. So that's kind of day-to-day stress. And I'm going to talk about when I get to kind of the physiological impacts that just kind of chronic day-to-day stress has on someone. Then I want to talk and differentiate between kind of a day-to-day external stressor, right, and kind of what impact it has on us, and then kind of what could potentially be traumatic. And this was more of a local study, actually, where by the age of 16, just under 3/4, now kind of following at the heels of kind of what our teens are already exposed to, is of course COVID, which obviously we know is a global pandemic. I believe that, and I just looked up these numbers this weekend, so I know they're always changing, but we're over 1.2 million Americans, this is within the US, have been diagnosed, over 77,000 deceased. I know projections are generally around 100,000 Americans will die. Thankfully, we know that teens are less impacted directly in terms of, severity of illness and risk of death, if, of course, they don't have other kind of risk factors, medical risk factors. So they may be less afraid of being directly impacted. At the same time, certainly they're aware, that loved ones could be impacted, and that they could experience a loss, especially, if you think of all the teens who have a loved one in the healthcare field. So, children who are getting used to now seeing their parents going off to work with their own anxiety about what they're being exposed to, essentially on their front lines. So I want to talk a little bit about kind of what happens in our body when we're encountering this degree of stress and even potentially traumatic events. Stress in and of itself is not bad. It, is, again, it's an external stimulus that kind of generates a response in us that hopefully is a survival response. So if you have heard of this idea of fight, flight, or freeze, it's a whole, and I'm going to speed through instead of breaking down all the minutia of it, but it's a reaction to a perceived danger in our environment. And with it, we have this whole systemic physiological reaction of fight, flight, or freeze, depending on the circumstances and our kind of genetic leanings, etc., that help protect us when there is real danger. So we get a dose of adrenaline and cortisol. We feel really anxious. Our body wants to protect ourselves and get away. It's all our sympathetic nervous system kind of activating us. It's completely appropriate at times of stress. Many of us right now are feeling, experiencing degrees of this. This talk is about teens, but absolutely, the parents in the virtual room, I'm sure our stress levels are by far higher than normal nowadays, especially when you're paying attention to the news. What we know about this, again, is that this fight, flight, or freeze stress reaction is appropriate when dealing with stress and when helping to keep us safe and our loved ones safe. It becomes problematic when it chronically stays up or we have trouble kind of relaxing back down. So our kind of nervous system is meant to come back to baseline or homeostasis. When chronically we're exposed to stress and we're not able to feel that sense of, peace and safety, or we're exposed to multiple stressors or traumas ongoing, now we have a higher risk of kind of ongoing negative effects that can impact brain development, neurological functioning, etc. And so kind of what I'm going to move into talking about is this idea of kind of what does child traumatic stress, what does this kind of these range of responses, how do they impact teens, and how can we, as parents and caregivers, support our teens through this time. So again, I can talk for hours on all these things. I'm kind of, moving intentionally quickly to get to the what do you do about it. But certainly, with all these stressors going on, learning is difficult. I know you've already had talks on it. I love the idea of reframing what we're engaging in right now. This is not online school. It's not homeschooling, for the sake, as if it were a free choice that families are making with resources and time to devote to it. This is crisis schooling that, we're all attempting right now. And so the ability for students to learn and teens to really engage and concentrate is limited right now because of the stress. School performance is impacted. It impacts emotional well-being. I'll talk more about this, and different health outcomes. So not everyone is impacted the same way. But, even if you look at an extreme trauma like 9/11, not everyone who was in 9/11 walked away with PTSD, thankfully, right? There's lots of different factors that impact how severely someone might be affected. So people, let's talk about COVID, teens who are going to be more at risk are teens who are more directly exposed. So how much their personal life is disrupted. Do they have a family member on the front lines? Have they lost a family member, of course? Did their family lose income and stability? And there's a lot of anxiety in the family about it. Is there, concern about paying bills and having food on the table? That's going to make that adolescent more at risk. As well as adolescents who have existing learning needs, physical or emotional needs. So of course, in my practice, I have a lot of youth who have pre-existing anxiety, depression, have experienced their own traumas already. And now they're in a situation where the world feels unpredictable and unsafe. And I can't, there's so much I can't control right now. My nervous system is just all out of whack. I'm not feeling safe and secure. So someone like that is going to be potentially more impacted by the effects of social isolation. That's a big one that's really hard for teens. We'll talk about. Protective factors, it's not all, a gloomy picture, that there's so much resilience in teens. And so when we look at these different factors, which is, I believe, at TrinityPrep, this is something that you really believe in, is kind of looking at each individual child and what are their strengths and what are their resources? What can they build upon to build confidence and connection and creativity, and use all these different forms of intelligence, not just our traditional, to help a child and family navigate times. So I'm going to zoom in on trauma in adolescence and how adolescents particularly tend to be impacted, so that we can kind of keep that in mind with what we're looking for with COVID. So adolescents, are in a higher stage of development in terms of their ability to kind of think more abstractly and conceptually. So it's a little bit of a double-edged sword because it's not fully developed yet, but they're more able to identify danger, to really kind of think conceptually about the risks involved. At the same time, we know that the prefrontal cortex is not completely developed until really your mid-20s. So there is this sense, it's true with teens, kind of this sense of invincibility, that it's hard to kind of anticipate the consequences and really kind of play things forward of how it's going to, how things will go. And so particularly I'm seeing a lot of this with teens who are saying, well, I'm not going to get sick and I'm just going to go see my friends, and because that's more important to me right now. My peer group is what's really important to my identity. And kind of these risks aren't really, making much of an impact on me. They can think more kind of greater and have more meaningful conversations about kind of risks and benefits and justice. They can see kind of the systemic issues that are being highlighted by this crisis. And so I see a lot of really kind of more sensitive and intuitive teens who are really kind of thinking about the ways in which different people are struggling right now. They can be more kind of self-aware and equally self-critical of their own responses. Oh, I shouldn't be having a hard time right now. I shouldn't be distracted. Why aren't I getting, all the grades that I did before? You can see a lot of shame and guilt, even if it's, unreasonable, as well as kind of a social withdrawal or detachment. So kind of, for people who are at risk of anxiety or depression, especially, as well as in addiction recovery, it's hard to connect. And so equally so, it's so important, but when we are, needing to isolate socially, that can kind of reduce our resources and make it harder to cope. And so it's really a bind that we're finding ourselves in. And then you can definitely see, a fair dose of irritability, aggression, and teens, of course, are at higher risk of different risk-taking behaviors, and thinking more fatalistically, kind of understanding, if they're feeling hopeless, understanding kind of the concept of death and suicide, and potentially if they have certain risk factors lined up, that is, when they're feeling hopeless and isolated, that is a risk that we want to look out for. And so with all this, and here we get into kind of what can we do about it. With all of these, risks, I see a lot of families, especially parents, really struggling with, well, what do I do with this? This is so complicated and stressful for me as an adult. How do I, what do I have to offer my child in the way of kind of guiding them through it? It's really hard for parents to bear witness to their children's distress. It's innate, it's biological. You hear your baby cry, you want to make them feel better. You want to soothe them. It's completely natural. And yet some things we can't control, right? We are equally helpless for the most part, in the spread of the large scale spread of COVID. And so we can't protect them from their feelings. Really the most helpful thing we can do is to recognize and respect and validate the feelings they're having, so that these feelings are normal and understandable. There was a great article that I read, and I've shared a ton of times if you're interested in looking it up. It was by the Harvard Business Review, and it's called I believe the feelings that you're having are grief. And so it talks about a lot of kind of parallels between the grief process and what we're experiencing as a community now, in a loss of normalcy and predictability. Seniors are experiencing grief for sure, in not returning to school and not being able to experience all of these kinds of rites of passage. So, all these hosts of loneliness, anxiety, helplessness are very normal. And I even added relief, for some teens where it's really hard being in school. It's really hard to socialize. Well, I had one teen say to me, I'm living my best life. I don't have to talk to anyone. And I validated that feeling too. And then was gently saying, okay, but we got to connect. Let's do both here. And so again, like I said, I'm seeing a lot of teens, understandably so, resist social distancing. My peers are so important to me. That developmentally it makes sense. But it asks me to stay home, it feels like I'm regressing. It feels like I'm a little kid again, and my parents are, hovering over me. They'll feel like, oh, my parents are doing this to me. They're also, like I said, they're less directly impacted. So they say, well, why do I have to worry about this? This is an older person problem. Again, there's some conflict in kind of understanding risk versus invincibility. And then it's hard to wait, especially when, the goalpost keeps getting pushed further away of how long, when is the peak going to be? When are we going to be able to kind of get back to real life? And so, again, I do see parents, it's exhausting being parents, especially right now with all the multiple roles that parents are kind of asked to fill as being parents and teacher and, oh, by the way, work from home full time, that it's a lot. And so a lot of parents are just kind of worn out and saying, fine, go. The problem with that, of course, is that, there is kind of a health risk associated with it. And that teens can then, of course, grapple with and feel guilty about maybe exposing others or, bringing it home to a family member who's at risk, etc. And so again, this is really kind of a tenet of parenting adolescents, is that you can validate and honor and respect their feelings without fixing anything for them. You can just be with them and sharing how much this sucks. you know, that can be the most helpful response you can give. And then kind of engage more in a collaborative conversation about how we can get through it as a family. And so it's both. It's not either or, it's both. You validate feelings and you still model and expect healthy behaviors, which is something that I also explain. It's out of love and care and compassion for each other, right? In our community, that we're doing these things to protect the most vulnerable among us. And so it's this idea in therapy, they call it radical acceptance. This idea that, you know, as horrible as things are, we can kind of work through our feelings about it and kind of come to a place of, okay, well, it is this horrible, and how do we cope? How can I find a sense of control in this situation? And so, you know, what can I do? How can I connect with my peers creatively? You know, I know they are kind of loosening with Cooper's phase 1, you know, loosening some restrictions. You know, can we have a social distancing, you know, go outside and stay separate, or, you know, whatever we have to do. I would be more lenient. You want to have, you know, be reasonable, but more lenient with social media in a way for peers to connect now. What's it called? House party, you know, that there's different kind of games, online games that friends can play together. So that's kind of a nice way to do it. I would balance as a parent, balance giving your teen space so you're not hovering and they don't feel like they're a little kid again, with finding ways to connect as a family. So I'm actually hearing some really, you know, nice, heartwarming stories about families who say like, hey, this is kind of bonus time I have with my teen. You know, I was expecting I didn't have these days anymore, and yet here we are cooking as a family or going on a, you know, evening walk, etc. So, and maybe the teen doesn't even protest too much once in a while. So there are some kind of secondary gains in this whole experience. I would definitely model healthy behaviors. These are things that hopefully you're hearing and can incorporate: sleep, exercise, nutrition, all of that. Again, with having reasonable conversations, finding ways and supporting staying connected in the school environment, reducing the pressure of kind of the grade and all of that, and really just kind of being actively involved in a sense of community, having some say. I'm sure you're thinking very mindfully and intentionally about how can we celebrate our seniors? What would our seniors like, you know, in order to kind of recognize this time? How can the rest of the school community support them? You do want to limit kind of exposure to the news. I don't at all advocate kind of an ignorance mentality, because we do need information to make safe decisions, but that you're, you know, being careful about what sources you're using, and you're getting information that's going to be most helpful. Something else that's incredibly helpful, and again, all these things I would be doing kind of as parents as well, is practice gratitude. Try to find moments every day. It really has a positive impact on our mental and physical health. Kind of what are the silver linings in this? I was thinking this as I was eating dinner in between my regular, you know, day of clients and doing this talk, and I'm sitting downstairs like eating dinner at my kitchen table, and my commute is walking up the stairs into the office, so that was really nice. Right now I'm going to leave this and I'm going to go do bedtime. And then, you know, maybe even consider practicing mindfulness together as a family. Maybe that's, you know, doing some yoga or going on a walk, or, you know, exploring. There's so many different apps that you can listen to or share. That might be a great resource. Finally, I cannot understate enough how important it is as parents and caregivers that we take care of ourselves. Our children and teens are sponges, and they're not gonna, you know, it's not a do what I say and not what I do. They're going to be absorbing what you're doing. They're going to be kind of sensitive to your own emotional temperature and reactive to that. So, as well as you're going through this incredibly stressful, even potentially traumatic situation as well. And so, you know, something that as therapists we understand is this concept of vicarious traumatization. So when you're worried about someone else, when you're taking care of someone else, when you're constantly in it, your nervous system is activated. You're on high alert as well. And so as a parent, you need to take your time where you can breathe, where you can bring yourself down and feel more grounded as well. It's kind of the metaphor, you know, when you're flying and there's turbulence, you have to first put the mask, yes, the oxygen mask on yourself before you take care of others. And that really holds true. So as just a parent, be in touch with yourself and how you are doing, how you are reacting. I have some things that you kind of look for that are common in caregivers, especially if you're in a sandwich generation and you're worrying about your own parents and you're involved in their caregiving. There's a lot there to manage. And like I said, just kind of monitor your own reactions, talk about it. You know, when you're stressed, it doesn't necessarily help to say, oh, everything's fine, because your child knows that everything is not fine. And that's kind of giving them a confusing and invalidating message. Say, this is a hard day. You know, it's okay to say, I'm feeling kind of worried right now. I would then connect it to how you are working to take care of yourself, how you are connecting with resources. So there's a sense of kind of hope involved in the message as well, that it's kind of a learning, it can be a learning tool. And so just kind of, you know, thinking about your own ways as well to practice self-care, have your own time to tag out, be aware of your own traumas, your own experiences where you felt helpless or out of control, et cetera, because those may be a little stirred up right now, which would be predictable, and see about getting your own support. I do just include things to look for that are kind of more red flags. So if your teen is experiencing or evidencing any of this, it may be wise to reach out to a mental health provider. And I have kind of your standards to look for there. And then I think I kind of pushed myself through so we would have time for question and answer. These are all really excellent resources. I would highlight, obviously, kind of for the fact-based, kind of more helpful guidance, you have the CDC and the World Health Organization. I also like for, you know, guidance for parents in terms of the mental health piece. I really strongly recommend Child Mind Institute, and they have a whole section on COVID right now for parents, as well as the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. Their resources are incredible as well. So there's certainly, you know, if you have the time, it's worth exploring. And then I think that's it. I'll say, as I was putting together my PowerPoint, I included a picture of my office because I do miss being in person in that space now. So I will pause there. If you all have any questions or reactions, I'm happy to open it up to a little bit of a dialogue. And I guess you have to unmute yourself if you have a question or comment. I see everyone's on mute. I'm tempted to ask how everyone is holding up.
Hello.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm well, thank you.
I enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you, I'm very glad.
Also, hello to all of the parents and teachers.
Okay.
Okay, bye, Dr. Engel.
Hi, Adele. you say
Oh,
bye.
that's Miss Corwin. Hi. Also, bye. Dr. Emily Engel is very, very talented, just so you guys know. Goodbye. Have a nice evening.
You too. Good.
I have a question, Dr. Engel.
Sure.
What if you have some issues with your teenager, like after not going to sleep, and then they stay up all night, and then it's just seems to be a vicious cycle and control too when parents like want to sleep, and then how can you help without fighting with your teenager?
Yeah. I mean, it's such a common struggle, and it's honestly, COVID has just exacerbated the whole situation, because you could have some just experiential learning for them when they have to get up and get to class in the morning. There's some motivation, you feel it when you're up late, you don't feel good going to class that next morning. And so now there's less of that, right? Maybe they have a Zoom call or something, but it's not the same thing. I'm definitely seeing we call it sleep hygiene, kind of those kind of behaviors or skills around staying kind of regular in your circadian rhythms, having good habits. And I'm definitely seeing a lot of teens struggling with that right now. I don't know I don't know that I would advocate for just kind of going head to head and having a control battle over it right now, because I think where I would be very firm on my limit is kind of what as a family you believe is right in terms of kind of following the experts in terms of social distance is more important. For sleep, I would try to first of all engage in a time when it's not 1 a.m. and you hear them up. Because whenever you engage around a conflict, it's already doomed before you've started, that it's going to be a battle. So I would try to kind of make it a routine to kind of check in with how everyone's doing on a more neutral time. It would be a great idea if you were up to it to implement kind of like a family check-in, family meeting kind of thing once a week. Just how's everyone doing? Because you're surviving this together. And so maybe you include some positives, what's going really well, you build each other up. And then you say kind of, where are we struggling? What do we need to work on? What are some concerns? I try to find my best buy-in in terms of what they already care about and how they are feeling themselves. If you, my parent, tell me that what I'm doing is wrong, I'm not going to really want to hear it. But if maybe we meet around the fact that I'm not actually feeling that well lately, and I'm getting more cranky with my friends, well, maybe now I'm a little more open to think about, hey, if I'm not sleeping well, what effect might that have on my body? Maybe we can talk about what role sleep has and what options there are, maybe something that would work. I definitely, recommend people try to go to bed at the same time every night, wake up at the same time in the morning, try to avoid napping, not having caffeine late at night, not having screens, which is another really tough one to convince teens of, not having screens right before bed, all of those kinds of things. But the more you can kind of engage them in a curious conversation outside of the conflict, the better. And then I guess you really are kind of choosing your battles of what's, where that limit is for your family.
I feel like, well, that's my husband. And we do have a son at Trinity, but I feel like this is only just going to go on all summer. Right now we have, as a school, they only have assignments through Friday, and if they're behind, which we are, they have a few weeks to catch up, but that's basically through the end of May. And then, you know, everything that we had planned this summer has been completely taken away, in terms of camps or any sports or anything like that. And so I feel like right now we have a little bit of like something to do in the day, but that's going to end at the end of May, and just trying to figure out like what that looks like for, you know, 3 months, or hopefully not more, but 3 months, you know, an extended period of time with basically no structure. Like we don't have anywhere we have to go at all. I mean, we do, but our kids don't. And so just like trying to think of like strategies or what that looks like for 3 months extended with really like he has no reason to even get up in the morning. I mean, like at all. Like there's like no reason, nowhere he has to be and nothing he has to do. And so I don't know.
Well,
but I'm just bracing myself for the summer, because I feel like we have something right now, but it's gonna go away.
Right. No, and I mean a lot of families, teens all over the country, if not the world, are experiencing the same thing. Again, I would love if, you know, I would encourage families to try to kind of think of this as, you know, you're a team right now, and whatever metaphor, right? And it kind of being tossed around in the seas and you're all in the same rowboat, but really kind of how do we get through this time, and where can you find opportunities for them to be kind of open to having a collaborative conversation about it. That yes, absolutely, structure is so important, and you naturally in day-to-day life we have enough of that built in with school and assignments and things and jobs, and that's extremely limited right now. So again, there is this little bit of a regression where, okay, now I'm under my parents, you know, feet all day. They want more independence, and yet we're suddenly expecting them to have these adult level skills of being able to manage and regulate themselves, which, you know, I'm in my 30s and I'm needing to work pretty actively to figure out how am I getting through this? What am I doing day to day? And so absolutely, I would try to have open conversations, validate, and kind of normalize what they're feeling, and then say kind of what's going to work for our family. And I would build as much structure as possible, you know, hopefully collaboratively. Get up in the morning, take a shower, get dressed, brush your teeth. Those are things that are going to make you feel better. You know, again, I don't, you know your individual family, but definitely these types of factors are associated with more anxiety and depression, right? Like being, you know, isolated from peers, if they don't have a good sleep routine, if they're not kind of taking care of themselves, if they're not engaged, their motivation goes down, their energy goes down, things like that. So to have a sense of structure, what does that look like? You know, what activities could they work to fill their day with? I'm encouraging teens to kind of think about, okay, this is a great opportunity. The pressure is off with school, over the school. What would you like to do and explore? No one's forcing you to do it. No one's grading you, right? Do you have an interest in cooking? Do you want to kind of take on a challenge? You could go through like if you've seen Nailed It on Netflix, it's like a cute little baking show. They show you like, this is what you're supposed to make. Or there's another one, Chopped, where you get like 3 ingredients and you have to make a dish. Let that be like every day or every week, like I'm going to do a Chopped tournament with my family. There's free classes all over online right now, all kinds of different classes. I would try to kind of get outside of the box of what they are associating with school and just think, what's something you'd like to learn about? Do you want to learn a language? Do you want to explore music? You know, are there new, I have a dance background. I'm really into dance. And I was so excited because a lot of professional studios are posting live classes. And so you can go on social media and you can take like a dance class from Alvin Ailey. So if they really can kind of follow their interest or passion and have some freedom to do that, that might be a nice thing. Painting, whatever. And I can't understate how important it is to get outside and get fresh air and exercise for physical health, emotional health, etc. So I know it's still not the same, but kind of ways day in, day out, ideas that you can have, creative ways you can connect. I'm also, one last idea, I'm also encouraging teens, like, what if you create your own class? Like, what if you want to do yoga with friends and you all like log on to something at the same time and you do a class together? Ways, again, to kind of connect and, stay connected and have something novel and interesting to do. But it definitely takes a lot of creativity and initiative to try these different things and find successes in that.
I like that suggestion. One of the things that I'm noticing that my daughter is doing, and I'm doing it as well, is we're almost compulsing about things. And I guess it's that we can control. I mean, she has taken her closet apart and put it back together several times over this, and she's not known for being very tidy, but man, she's compulsing about that. And I find myself doing the same thing. I don't want to do the regular stuff I need to do around the house, but I'll take apart one of the storage rooms.
Yep.
And try to, and so
yeah,
I like the idea about trying to come up with other stuff to explore that might give us, broaden our horizons a little bit.
I just got myself, and I actually purchased one and mailed it to my mother, a paint by numbers, like a pretty advanced adult paint by numbers thing that I never would have done before, but I said, all right, this is the time to do something. You can learn skills around the house, paint a room, do whatever. If you'll allow your teen to kind of fully decorate their room and paint a mural on it, or whatever, kind of, I think this is really the time for creativity.
Yeah.
And I want to kind of restate one piece that I think is really important. It's also the time to grieve together. That sometimes as parents, we can work so hard to make everything fun and figure out the plan that I don't want to bypass their natural emotions. And so, I'm spending basically all day with teens right now, just kind of validating where they are and how angry they are and how much they feel helpless or confused, or, if you read that article, denial, this, I go through denial. I wake up one day and I'm saying, oh, wait, is this real life still? Is this really happening? We still need to cope with this. So, these are things you can share. You might not all be in the same place emotionally at the same time, but you can definitely, relate to each other and have kind of some opportunities to really kind of grow in your emotional connection as a family. One last thing I'll say just about trauma that we've learned that's really helpful towards resilience is that it's not all bad. It's in no way the platitude people will say, or the cliche, everything happens for a reason, or it was meant to be. I believe at least that no, that's not the way it works. And I've actually responded to community disasters with clergy and religious leaders who have said the same thing, that that's not it. But when we go through adversity, when we go through traumas and heartache, etc., we can absolutely get stronger. We can connect with our sense of empathy and sensitivity to others, our intuition. We can develop skills in navigating kind of difficult times. We can develop a sense of spirituality or meaning through this. So, so many examples of people who, have changed their life direction, or, started a really meaningful business or whatever based upon a hardship they've experienced. So I would just also be checking in with yourself personally and, planting those seeds for your children as well. They are the COVID generation. So what does that mean to them, and what do they want out of this time and this experience? Same thing for, juniors, rising seniors, for seniors going off to college. What is it they want, and how do they want to pursue that? This generation they were less involved, but they're getting, sadly because of school shootings and climate change, but they're getting more involved in terms of activism and reaching out to legislatures and kind of raising their voices. It's kind of a really healthy way of finding what you can control, of what power you do have. And so what do they want to say? What meaning does this make for them in their lives? Can be really healthy for them to explore.
Well, thank you, Dr. Engel. I really, really appreciate you coming on tonight and to our parents and families. And I got so much out of what you shared. We'd love to have you back again in the future, hopefully in person.
Yes,
But
it was definitely unique. It was memorable for me, for sure. I appreciate all your active involvement, so I don't feel like I'm just talking to myself